of a religion and you end up an atheist. Let me explain what I mean. And I'm not meaning to critique every form of Buddhism that exists, but you know, in some of the oldest iterations of Buddhism you find in the world, Theravada Buddhism, you find that they have a concept of anatma and anishwar, no God, no soul. Now, sometimes neo-Buddhist philosophers try and wiggle out of this, but these terms are pretty clear. Buddhism rose up not in a, honestly, I think a lot of Buddhists don't know this, but like if you look at the final chapter of the Dhammapada, it's a classic text on Buddhism, not the oldest text, but a classic text on Buddhism. The last chapter is, who is a Brahmin? Who is a Brahmin? So the Buddhists are a non-Vedic tradition. Buddhism is considered to be Gnostic, in a classical analysis of what is real and what is false. If you go back to an old book like the Manu Samhita, you find that traditions that accept the Vedas are astic, and traditions which reject the Vedas are Gnostic, which sounds kind of like nasty. So, and it's not too far off. Gnostic means na asti. They don't really exist. Asti is to be, something that is. And so na asti means things that are not. They don't really exist. They're false. They're fundamentally false. So Buddhism is a Gnostic tradition, according to Manu. And other traditions that may even be atheistic are considered to be astic. It's an interesting phenomenon, but whether or not you believe in God wasn't as important to old Vedic peoples as whether or not you accepted the Vedas. Did you follow that? Whether or not you believed in God was less important to the Vedic peoples compared to whether or not you accepted the Vedas. If you accepted the Vedas, even if your interpretation of them was erroneous or was found to be lacking, or you argued with other traditions about what the interpretation of the sacred text was, if you accepted the sacred text, you were astic, you were part of the family, you were at least a loyal opposition, and you were counted as a member of our tribe. If you did not accept the Vedas, and even if you believed in God, you were an apostate. You were heterodox. You were the other in the, you were, them in the us and them analysis. Did you guys follow that? I don't feel this way personally, but I'd rather hang out with a theist who didn't accept my sacred text than an atheist who did. But this was the way that Manu divided it up. Astic and Gnostic. Buddhism is Gnostic because it doesn't accept the Vedas. But you got to understand, Buddhism did not rise up in a vacuum. Buddhism was a schism, or a reaction, or a revolt, or a revolution against the reigning culture of the time, which was the Vedic culture, Brahminical culture, the culture of sacrifices and priests and what have you. Are you guys following all this? Okay. Now, when you're a schism, you can never get away. Like, what are two religious groups that really don't get along? Muslims and Christians. Number two, Muslims and Jews. Number three, Huh? Muslims and Hindus. Number 4? Huh? Mormons love Christians. Mormons like trying to be like full try-hard Christians. Are you kidding me? The Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints. They can't get enough Jesus. They don't want to be seen as a cult, and so they connect themselves to the older tradition of Christianity and thereby give themselves some bona fides. Christians and Jews traditionally don't get along. You guys obviously know nothing about the history of religion, otherwise that would have come. I gave you the Muslim ones first because obviously they're ones that are most prominent in people's minds, but Christians and Jews have hated each other for a long, long time. Why do Christians hate the Jews? Because the Jews killed Jesus. Yeah, it boils down to that. The Pharisees arranged with Pontius Pilate to assassinate Jesus. Christians hate the Jews. But Christianity grew out of a Jewish milieu. And as such, there's no way to separate Christianity from Judaism. There's no way to separate Christianity from Judaism. In fact, the Old Testament is... Huh? The Old Testament is the Torah. Not the whole thing, but most of it. Not the whole Torah, but most of it. The Torah has a few books in it that the Old Testament does not. But the Old Testament is a Greek translation of the Torah called the Septuagint. It was translated by 70 scholars a couple of centuries, at least according to the tradition, a couple of centuries before Jesus. The Old Testament is a Greek translation of the bulk of the Torah. So much of Christian philosophy is Judaism repackaged. In fact, if you want to really get into Christianity and you want to study the Old Testament, you got to go and learn Hebrew. And you got to go and learn Judaism. The whole idea in Judaism was that you offered a blood sacrifice to God to show your gratitude. You offered a blood sacrifice to God. You slaughtered a ram ritually. And that was offered in the great temple in Jerusalem. And the Jewish cult was a sacrificial cult where they offered... somebody's there and they're moving around on their camera. It's a bit much. Who is that?
It's Krishna.
Oh, yeah, Krishna. Okay, she blocked herself out. Yeah. If you're going to start like dancing around doing a scene, X the camera. Thank you. So the Jewish cult was a sacrificial cult. Now they were the rise of monotheism within the polytheism of ancient Egypt and ancient Babylon. And there's a group of people who said there must be one God to rule them all. But that sacrificial culture was around and they participated, and most old traditions did, including my own. And so the whole story of Jesus as the Lamb of God, as the Paschal Lamb of God, as the Passover lamb sacrificed to appease God and say thanks, that connected the Jewish people in gratitude with God who forgave and endorsed and helped them. That's the story of Christianity. Jesus became that lamb, was sacrificed on the crucifix the same way a lamb was sacrificed on the altar, and thereby connected the Jewish people or the new Christian people who had faith in Jesus with their Maker. The entirety of Christianity is really a kind of a a reenactment of the yearly sacrifice. The Last Supper is Passover. Jesus became the sacrificial animal that was offered to gain God's forgiveness. Did you guys follow that? Did you follow the Hari Bhakta? There's just no way to separate it. So Buddhism can't get separated from Hinduism either. So much so that the last chapter of the Dhammapada is who's a Brahmana, meaning, oh, you guys think you're the Brahmanas? I'm going to tell you who a Brahmin really is. Like imagine if I wrote a book, like an anti-Christian book, and my last chapter was, who's the real Christian? It's like a slap in the face to the pre-existing tradition. I'm trying to pick a fight. Who's a real bishop? Who's a real cardinal? Who's a real deacon? Do you follow? I'm trying to pick a fight with that tradition, saying, you guys aren't representing the truth, I'm representing the truth. You understand? Just to give you some kind of a feeling for what that might feel like. Imagine some white people wrote a paper about the BLM movement, and part of the paper was, who's really black? And they were trying to claim that they were the real black people. That would, of course, go over like a Led Zeppelin. It would just, crash and burn. That's how inflammatory. That's how inflammatory the statement, who's a real Brahmana, is. To an entire country. Do you follow? It's a heavy, heavy slap in the face. And that, I'm not giving you an extreme example. If anything, that's a little bit of a mild example. You talk to a bunch of black people. Is your soul black? Are you eternally black? Or are those things part of who you are fundamentally? But when you're talking about who's a Brahmana, you're talking about who somebody is fundamentally on the absolute spiritual level, and you're critiquing an entire tradition which had existed for thousands and thousands of years. It's way worse than the 400 years, or something which goes skin deep, or something which is genetic. It's an attempt to critique perennial philosophy and the fundamentals of a religion. So if anything, that analogy is apropos, or it's even a little bit mild compared to what a slap in the face it would have been to the Vedic peoples. So when Buddhism said that our philosophy is anatma. Atma in Sanskrit means? Huh? That's right. Anatma, no soul. Like theist, atheist, no God. Anatma. You put an A in front of an A, you have to put an N in there, because otherwise it would be Atma, but it's already Atma, so you have to put an N next to the A. Anatma, Anishwar. Ishwar means, Sanskrit? God. Anishwar, no God. Anatma, Anishwar. Anatta is what they said. They spoke in Pali, which was a kind of a people's version of Sanskrit. Anatta is Anatma in Sanskrit. Anishwar, no God, no soul. Sometimes neo-Buddhist philosophers try and say, well, they're not trying to say there's really no soul. No, that's exactly what they're trying to say. They used the language of their time to communicate to the people of their time exactly how they differed from the patriarchy, how they differed from the monolithic Vedic culture that they were fighting against. So one of my critiques of Buddhism, one of my standard critiques of Buddhism is you get all the hang-ups of explaining a religion. You got to explain heaven and hell. You got to explain reincarnation. All sorts of stuff atheists don't have to contend with. So you have to explain that you reincarnate. You have to explain there's a heaven and hell you can go to. Do you understand? You have a lot of explaining to do. You have all the regular stuff a religion has to explain. All the paranormal stuff that a religion has to explain and philosophize and convince you actually exists. A law of karma. That just, that you can go on beyond one body. The skandhas can go on beyond one body. It's not the soul. It's just a confluence of essentially like rivers that come together, and that makes you think you exist, but you don't really exist. But then when you die, you should just then automatically achieve nirvana. But no, you go on and suffer perpetually based on desire, thirst, trishna, thirst, and suffering, which is the automatic consequence of desire. And to get out of that and escape that, you then have to practice assiduously, maybe even for many lifetimes. And then finally, you can disintegrate and become nothing. So it's all the work of a religion, because you got to explain all this paranormal stuff, like reincarnation and heaven and hell and all sorts of stuff that goes beyond what you see around you. But at the end of the day, you end up with garden variety atheism that you disintegrate. Did you follow that? Oh, is that you? Is that? It's not. It's you? I thought that was my daughter.
No.
Hazel, right? It's Hazel, right? Hazel can make noise. No problem. I thought it was my daughter. Do you guys follow that? That's part of my standard critique of Buddhism. It's not like a very deep critique. It's like a zinger almost. It's not meant to critique the actual tradition, but it's just meant to give people pause and make them think for a second. You get all the hard work of a religion and none of the benefits, because you don't get to believe in a soul or God or anything that goes beyond, and you ultimately disintegrate. You blow out. Even their definition of liberation is a negative definition. It's what you're not. Nirvana. You blow yourself out. You extinguish yourself. The Vedic peoples referred to Buddhists as shunyavads. They were voidists. Shunya means void. They were nihilists. They were voidists. That's how we thought of Buddhists. There's a much different tradition called Advaita, which means oneness, where somebody postulates that everything becomes one. We have another critique for them. But the Advaitins, they're different than the Shunyavadis. They say everything is zero. They say everything is one. It's very different, because at least the Advaitins, they argue that something exists eternally. There is something, truth to God. There is some higher truth that you're a part of. It might be devoid of variety, but at least something exists in perpetuity, whereas the Shunyavadis don't even believe that. They're nihilists. Normally, if you're a nihilist, you can just, eat, drink, and be merry, and you're going to die, and you can be depressed and get a little goth or whatever. But the Buddhists had to be incredibly austere, and they still wound up with largely a nihilistic philosophy. Do you guys follow that? If you want to study a tradition, at some point you got to go back and study the parent tradition it grew out of, because by understanding the parent tradition, you can then understand what makes that tradition special and how they evolved and how they're different. It's critical, really. Schisms are defined by how they're different than the parent culture. Whether you're an atheist or whether you're a theist, philosophy tends to head towards fundamental truth. What's really going on? If you say that there's no fundamental truth, you just introduced a fundamental truth. You follow? If everything is subjective and nothing is objectively true forever, then there's one thing which is objectively true forever, and that's that nothing is true forever. Did you follow that? So even a radical subjectivist is still trying to figure out what's really going on. Even when you say, this is kind of happens in literary criticism, or it's kind of like a postmodern subjectivist, radical subjectivist position. There are no absolute barometers for judging anything. Everything is fundamentally subjective. The eye of the beholder determines how something is judged. You could go big. You could say molesting children isn't wrong. There's some tribes that do that. And who are you to say? It's your anthropomorphic perspective against somebody else's. Who are you to value anything? You follow? Still, that principle becomes your objective principle. Atheists are doing the same thing. It's natural selection. Like I had a guy critique me today, or yesterday, I guess. I got around to reading it today. I was talking about eating meat, and he said, oh, well, it's evolution. Eating meat is evolutionary. And my response was, yeah, so's eating your young. Lots of animals eat their young, eat the weak young. So it's survival of the fittest. And lots of animals rape. And that's procreative. So that's like straight up Darwinian evolutionary theory, little natural selection, little selfish gene. And you got to, continue your species, continue your genetic inheritance. It's totally natural. Happens in nature all the time. But it's preposterous to think that such things are moral for human beings. And so just because something is natural doesn't mean it's good or healthy in human society. Which largely is about evolving beyond just nature and becoming thoughtful and introspective. It's interesting, but people who want to talk about this type of naturalism and this type of survival of the fittest, they argue like on TV and they type on keyboards. But that's not the law of the jungle. The law of the jungle is might is right. Go and kill somebody who doesn't agree with you. Hide behind a keyboard and do it. You've already admitted that you're beyond the law of the jungle simply by getting on a keyboard and trying to have a little keyboard trolling war with somebody. Did you follow that? You've already lost your position as being an animal and like a predator. Go be a predator. Don't hide behind a computer screen and an avatar of yourself. You follow? Like everybody's a tough guy when they're in their car with the windows rolled up. Everybody's going to yell at you and cuss you out when they're sitting in the car and you're in your car and you got the windows rolled up and they're screaming bloody murder at you. But the world looks a lot different when they pull the cars over and people get out of the cars. You're wearing clothes. You're using fire. You're building houses. You're making civilizations. You're growing crops. You're protecting the young, the weak, and the innocent. We're philosophizing about Black Lives Matter, important topics. We're looking at the wrongness of murder, authority structures. You follow? That's not survival of the fittest. that's already acknowledges and accepts, albeit tacitly, that we're capable of more than just survival of the fittest. We're capable of morality. We're capable of thinking about like what's fair, what's real, what's true, what has value, what should we stand for. You got a comment on that?
I'm thinking of one.
Okay. So, philosophy, whether you're a theist or an atheist, you got to contend with the same stuff. Who am I? Why am I here? What's the purpose of life? What's it all about? It's the same stuff. Everybody has to deal with the same stuff. Even you're an atheist and you want to preach hedonism, that you should just enjoy your senses as much as possible. You make a case for it. You know, everything's going to be over when you die. As long as you're here for a very short period of time, the best thing you do is try and achieve pleasure. And sensual pleasure is the best kind of pleasure, and therefore everybody should try to achieve sensual pleasure. Or you could do a negative utilitarianism. You could say, try and create the least amount of pain for people. You could do it selfishly for yourself, or you could do it, with a bigger sense of self. Do it for the whole world. But everybody's trying to say this is valuable, this is what's important, this is what's real, this is what stands. Even like, the idea of like numbers, you can think about numbers for a second, like the number 1, 2, and 3, not as we write them or something like that, but the principle of 1, 2, and 3. Can you imagine a universe where the principle of numbers didn't exist? Or something was first and something was second and something was third? You can't. Philosophers have been trying to for quite some time. Numbers are this almost automatic, essential feature of any conceivable universe. The numbers might work different, like you have non-Euclidean geometry, but the principle of numbers would remain. It's vexing, isn't it? You're trying to think it through right now, right? You have a PhD in astrophysics, and that's like, whoa, right? It's called modal logic. You think about, what is probable, what is possible. You think about, what would be essentially true in any universe. You get this in theology too. Like if you said, could you? I'm going to ask you a question. Please listen up. It's a simple question, but it's got a little bit of detail to it. It's a simple question. Can you imagine a universe where everyone had free will and no one turned away from God? Can you imagine a universe where unlimited living entities had free will, but none of them turned away from God? Can you imagine such a universe? Of course you can. Could you imagine a monkey that could type out the complete works of Shakespeare? In any conceivable universe? Accidentally? Sure, because you have unlimited throws of the dice. So anything could happen. Do you follow? That's what infinity means. So there could be a universe, one out of the unlimited universe, where none of the living entities who had free will turned away from God. Did you follow it yet? I'm like a little bothered by you guys. You're lacking concept of infinity. Could you win the lottery 1 billion times in a row? Could you imagine a universe where you won the lottery 1 billion times in a row? Yes. Could you imagine a universe in an unlimited universe, unlimited universes, unlimited throws of dice, where you won the lottery unlimited times? Yes. So could you imagine a universe where everybody had free will but nobody turned away from God? Of course you can. Can you imagine a universe? You ready? Where we all have free will, but there's no possibility that somebody turns away from God. Can you imagine a universe where we all have free will, but there's no possibility that somebody turns away from God? No, you cannot. Because free will means there's a possibility. Because every living entity in that universe has the free will. So you can't imagine a universe where everybody has free will, but there's no possibility. You could imagine a universe where nobody did misuse their free will, but there would always be the possibility, because that's what free will means. Did you follow that? Yeah.
Well, just to play devil's advocate here, if you're, like, let's say the spiritual world is, Krishna says if you go there, you never come back. So isn't it like, let's say in a spiritual world where, like, let's say you look for God, for example, I know I'm going into like really esoteric topics, but
How is that esoteric?
it's not, it's
You're just using a Sanskrit word and kind of making it difficult for people to understand. But it's not particularly esoteric. You're just like really making it difficult. Can you imagine a heaven where you don't have the free will to leave? Where you have free will, but there's not the possibility of you leaving? Is there a possible heaven where you maintain your free will, but there's no possibility of leaving?
I would say that free will.
It's a real simple question. I'm not asking you to like change the discussion. I've got the mic. I'm asking the questions. You're answering it. That's how it works. Let me ask the question again. Can you imagine a heaven where you retain your free will and there's not the possibility that you leave?
I would say yes.
Explain what a heaven looks like where you have free will, but you don't have the possibility of turning away from God.
Well, I think the free will could be engaged in terms of how you serve God. Like, I have free will to serve God in this way.
Well, but I'm sorry. I'm defining free will as the freedom to commit action A at time, T or not. I'm not saying you get your choice of ice creams. I'm saying you get to choose whether you eat ice cream or not. I'm talking about actual free will with a capital F, not some pathetic circumscribed version of free will that's not free will. I'm talking about free will, what the word means in the English language. Let me ask my question again for the third time, because your devil's advocate is like, it's not very impressive. Can you imagine a heaven where the living entity has free will, but there's no possibility of that living entity turning away from God? No, you can't, because it's not possible. It's impossible. Such a heaven can't exist. So do you believe that when we go back to free will, we resign our, when we go back to heaven, we resign our free will? Do you believe that? No, that would be preposterous, right? Therefore, automatically, there must be the possibility we come back, correct? We're not forced to come back, but there must at least be the possibility we come back, correct? A disciple asked Prabhupada this question in Hawaii in 1975, and he answered the same way. He said, no, you can come back. You always have free will. So when it says you never come back, it means you're not forced to by some extraneous force. Karma doesn't force you to come back. You've learned your lesson. You have a peaceful life with God forever, but you always have the possibility of turning away from God because you have independence, because you have freedom. Did you follow that? Does that answer your question? When you find two things that appear to be contradictory, you got to ask yourself, which one can I not give up? And which one can I soften a little bit? You follow? Do you want to soften the idea that we have free will in heaven? You do not. Therefore, you have to soften the idea of what it means that you don't come back. That's the one where there's a little bit of wiggle room. Did you follow that? Does that answer your question? You made it way harder than it had to be. Like you asked me to dance, but then you like sat down in a chair and crossed your arms and folded your legs and like, made it all difficult on me. It's not like it's my first rodeo here. I've been asked the question before. Okay. Even if you're an atheist philosopher, you're still looking for some perennial truth. Fundamental particles, right? Fundamental forces. These are the principles of physics. They're trying to get down to fundamental particles. Bosons, neutrinos, fundamental particles, and fundamental forces. Electromagnetism, weak nuclear force. Fundamental particles, fundamental forces that govern the interaction of those fundamental particles. A soul is another attempt to put forward the idea that there's a fundamental particle. The self is itself a fundamental particle. Whether you're an atheist, whether you're a theist, whether you're a pretend theist but you're actually an atheist, it doesn't matter. Everybody, every philosopher is trying to figure out what's really going on. And if you say, no, there's a subjectivist, I already dealt with that one. Their idea is that nothing objective exists other than that nothing objective exists, which itself is an objective, fundamental, indefiable, ever-present truth about the nature of the world. There's no absolute truth. Are you absolutely sure there's no absolute truth? You follow that? All right. When you're talking to somebody from a tribe, from a group, you can ask, like, what do you believe? Like, what's the core of your belief? What are you really about? What do you think, like, really exists? What's it all about? You follow? That's what every serious philosophy does. Now we believe in a soul. So what we're really talking about is what's etched on your soul. What's etched on your soul? When you take away all that you're not, what's left? Do you think your soul is male or female? You think your soul is black or white? Or brown? You think your soul is human or animal? Young or old? Smart or stupid? American or European? Indian? Australian? You think your soul wears glasses? Has a full head of hair? Has a 5 o'clock shadow? Does your soul have genitalia? You follow? This is the questions of our tradition. We're trying to define what's the fundamental nature of the self. Once you let go of all that you're not, what's left? We have an answer. What's our answer? All of you should know this. You guys are all Hare Krishnas. I think everybody in the room is a Hare Krishna. At least everybody but like maybe one person is a Hare Krishna in the room, identifies as a Hare Krishna devotee. Every single person in the room should be able to answer the question. What's the question? I asked it like 3 times, man. Come on. When you strip away all that you're not, what's left? What's etched on your soul? What's who you really are? Everyone should be able to answer this question because it means you've understood the ABCs of our philosophy. I see you, Darshan. I'm purposely not calling on you because I know you know the answer to the question. So I'm trying to challenge everybody. If I call on you, the weight of it's not going to sink in. The weight of it's not going to hit everybody. Every single person in this room who identifies as a devotee, if you can't answer this question, you're really like there's something wrong with your teachers or your studying, or because it's the most basic question. It is the first question that you should learn the answer to if you want to be one of us, if you want to be part of our tribe. Who can answer the question? Who's sure they got the right answer? Raise your hand. You're not sure you got the right answer? Why didn't you raise your hand? You're not sure? Why am I having to get heavy with you to get you to raise your hand? I'm actually asking a question. I'm sitting here. You guys all came, it was some trouble to get here. You came here to listen to me speak. I'm now speaking. I'm asking you a question. Who feels like they can nail this question and answer? Raise your hand. You don't? Okay, who thinks they can answer? Not for sure, but who thinks they got the answer? Now raise your hand. Who thinks they got it? Either you know you got the answer or you think you got the answer. Raise your hand. Let me see. Almost everybody. You don't know or think you got the answer? who knows or thinks they have the answer. Hear that? They know you have the answer, or you think you have the answer. It's an inclusive group. It's A and B put together. All right. Now it's almost everybody. All right. What's the answer? I know. You didn't answer. You didn't raise your hand. That's why I'm asking you. Take a guess, kiddo. Just yell at me what you think. I don't believe you have no idea. I don't believe you have no idea. You think about it for a minute. Yes.
Krishna's servant?
Yes. You have an eternal, loving relationship with God as His servant, as His lover. Bhakti. Bhakti is the thing etched on the soul. Your relationship with Krishna. That you, as an eternal being, have a relationship with your Maker, and as a result of that, you have a relationship with all living entities. Because Krishna is the hub that connects you to every other spoke. That is the most fundamental core truth of our tradition. Jiva Swarupoy, Krishna Nityadas. The jiva has a fundamental form. The soul has a form, and it's as Krishna's eternal servant. Krishna's Nitya Das, eternal servant. It's a good answer, isn't it? It's a good answer to that question, right? In that sense, we are the same as every other theistic tradition on the planet. We might have a different conception of what God is, what the nature of that loving relationship is, more intimate, less intimate. But that idea is the core of every theistic tradition on the planet. The soul has a nature, and it's to be connected to loving, serving God. It might be a master-servant thing. It might be conceived of as two lovers. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of this discussion. You have an eternal relationship as Krishna's servant. You follow? How many of you had the answer right? Raise your hand. You know the answer right, Darshan?
No.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say such an abundance of bliss, knowledge, and eternity.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's our ontology. That's also in the same genre. It's not a bad answer. It's an excellent answer. But you're not just eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. You're connected to God. You follow? And because God's eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge, that's also your ultimate nature because you're capable of an eternal relationship with God. Does that make sense? So when we see people fighting over, when we see people fighting over bodily differences, like differences in gender or differences in race, our boilerplate answer is, hey, you're not the body. Everybody's Krishna's eternal servant. We should be able, in an almost communist way. I don't know how much you guys know, but there's like a soft communism and a hard communism. Bolshevism is hard communism. It's Lenin. He kind of won the day, and the Bolsheviks became the Communist Party, and that became the USSR. There were soft communists who believed that certain things would be collectivized, but other things would be left up to the individual. But there were the hard communists who believed in collectivizing most things, and that was who won. Even then, they had some room for there to be a little bit of independence. But the hardline communists were the Bolsheviks, and they won, and they were the Reds. We have that understanding of spirituality. We're all the same spiritually. It's a very utopian, kibbutz-esque, communist idea. And there's lots of movements in the world that believe this. I don't know that I believe we're all equal physically or mentally. I'm pretty sure everybody's different physically and mentally. I'm pretty sure. Every test I've ever read, women did better in linguistics than men did. When you looked across, like a meta-analysis, across a wide swath. And men did better at math. I don't imagine that no matter how fair we get, that we're going to find like a lot of people, let's say from Papua New Guinea, playing in the NBA. Some people are taller, some people are stronger, some people are better at math, some people are better at language. I don't actually have a problem with all that, because I believe that spiritually we're all equal, and therefore we should all have equal opportunity. And when I find that some people do better on a test or some people do worse on a test, I don't think that like fundamentally everybody's exactly the same. I mean, genetics has really disproven that. If we all get really good to each other, you know, there's certain communities that die more often of heart disease. They get certain types of cancer more often. I'm not afraid of differences. Because we're all equal spiritually. And we can make our laws in this country based on that. We can make our laws in every country based on that. Did you follow this? It's kind of a radical position, especially nowadays, to say that. It owns me now, I said it. But I'm fairly certain this is the only workable model for finding equality in the world. There's physical differences, there's mental differences. On the individual level, and probably when you look across groups of people along racial or gender lines, you'll probably find some differences too. And so what? If everybody's equal, everybody deserves equal opportunity. And I'll even go a step further. If we find a community of people, like people with disabilities, then we got to build ramps. It's not like equal opportunities to climb the stairs. We got to figure out, well, an equal opportunity for them means we got to build a ramp. Do you follow? So sometimes that equal opportunity for everybody involves going the extra mile for a disenfranchised group. You know, black people are 13% of the U.S. population. 40 million people in the U.S., 13% of the population right now. They commit 53% of the murders. 60% of the robberies. If you adjust for that, black people get killed way less than white people if you base it on the crimes they're committing. If you base it on their percentage of the population, it's twice what it should be. If you base it on the crimes they're committing, it's half to a third of what it should be. Certainly, when you're talking about, you know, police-involved shootings, 1,000 people a year that police kill, you should use crime as your baseline. If people are committing violent crimes, you're more likely to get shot by the police, not because of the color of your skin, but because of the violent crime you're committing. Did you follow this? The thing is, when you adjust, because 60% of black people are raised in poverty, 5% of white people are raised in poverty. When you make those adjustments, you find that it actually evens the whole thing out. It's not that black people innately, by virtue of their being black, are more prone to commit crimes than other races of people. Poor people are more prone to commit crimes. And black people are poor. And then when you look at reasons why black people are poor, you find it's because we made them poor. Because we made them poor. In a variety of ways that I've been talking about in recent weeks. But once we even it all out, and once we fix that, and once we take enough affirmative action, whether it's in the form of reparations or whether it's in the form of affirmative action, however we are able to conceive of it, There's a bill called H.R. 40 that's meant to study what reparations might look like. You know, I don't know if you know this, but when the Jews made Israel, the Germans paid them reparations. Did you guys know that? The Germans paid massive reparations to the Jews in Israel. It's what got them to put up the electrical grid. It's what kickstarted their economy. And there were huge numbers of Israeli Jews who were so against accepting a penny from the Germans. It was like when they finally signed the final reparations agreement for the Jews, no one spoke. They came in from different doors, they signed the papers in silence, and they walked out different doors. They never looked at each other, never spoke to each other, no handshake, no nothing. Because they killed 6 million Jews, more than one third of the Jewish population in the world. And the people whose family members have been killed were the ones signing the paper accepting X amount of money. And so for a huge chunk, it was like the elections in Israel were divided on this topic. On the people who said we should not accept a penny from the Germans ever. There's nothing they can do to pay us back, ever. As a moral principle, it puts a price on the life of our people. We won't even study reparations in this country. There's a congressman from Detroit. There's a congressman from Detroit, and every single year, when the Senate convenes, he introduces a bill, not the Senate, but when the Congress convenes, called H.R. 40, to study what reparations might look like. Not to authorize any payments, but just to study it. It's never even been voted on. No one wants to even talk about it. If you rob somebody, then you got to make restitution. They usually assess punitive damages. They figure out what you would have made during your lifetime. They got to give you that, and then they usually add some punitive damages if you haven't been sincere about it to punish you. It's punitive. They give you extra money just to punish you because you did the wrong thing. We've created, a huge chunk of our population, 13% of our population has been largely forced into poverty because of centuries of racist policies which were designed to rob them of their wealth that went on up until 1968. Even nowadays, they did a study recently, and black levels of unemployment with a college degree are 3 times that of white levels of unemployment with a college degree. They train people. They train interviewees to go to interviews and answer all the questions exactly the same. Answer all the questions exactly the same. These were professionals, black and white professionals, who were trained to take interviews, and they applied for the same job. They both had college degrees and exact same credentials. They did the interview the exact same way, except for the white people had a recent criminal charge on their interview that they disclosed. And the white people got, I think it was 35% more callbacks than the black people. There's some kind of racist mindset still in this country, as evidenced by that experiment. There's a bunch like that. It's just one. And in terms of actual public policy, up until 1968, we discriminated against people with loans. It wasn't even illegal. Really? I'm down to 5 minutes? Oh my God. Why would you only give me a 5-minute warning?
Sorry, I should have given you. Sorry. Look.
Okay, it's all right. I need 15 or 10. Otherwise, now I got nothing left. I can't segue into my class that I had planned. Normally, you guys give me 15 and then I segue into class. Shucks. I think there's real value in not identifying as black and white, man or woman, and to really understand what it means to conceive of yourself as a soul. I think there's a real value in that. I also don't think it's wrong to identify on some level with your tribe, with your ethnicity, and with your culture. Krishna explains in the Gita that you can worship him through doing your duty. And that indicates that there's going to be different ways in which people approach God. And you're going to use your God-given talents and your material skills in this world as part of your spiritual journey. You're going to use the tools that God gave you. If God gave you a fine mind, you're going to think about God. If God gave you a strong body, you're going to use that in service. If you're born in a family of farmers, you can pick up farming. It's got given to you automatically. It's in your veins. And so you can use your God-given talents, and people can worship God in different ways through their doing their duty, and those duties will be different. That means that our communal, communist worship of God and aspiration for Bhakti and seeing ourselves as being souls and fundamentally the same gets manifested differently based on the body we've been given. That means you can look at the things which are specific to you, your ethnicity, whether you're male or female, whether you're tall or short, young or old, fat or thin, strong or sick. And you can use those things as part of your formula for how you can best serve God in this world. I don't think that identifying on some level with the body that you're born into is necessarily at odds with cultivating and understanding that fundamentally you're beyond the body. Because we're in the body, just like you're in a car, and depending on the kind of car you're in, you're going to drive on certain roads. Maybe you don't drive on the freeway if your car doesn't go fast enough. Maybe you do drive on the freeway. Maybe if you're in a four-wheel drive, you don't worry about going over a pothole. If you're in a sports car, you might really have to worry about going over a pothole. And so we're all given these different cars. And I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at that and sculpting a way for you to connect with God that's based on the body that you inhabit. I don't think that's at odds with understanding spiritually that you're beyond this world. I think there's room to incorporate your ethnicity, your gender, your community background, your nationality into the unique way, formula, recipe for how exactly you manifest your spirituality in this world. I also think that social activism can be a part of that. I think that uplifting our communities can be a part of that. And that when we use this really heavy club, that you're not the body, and we fully fathom what it intends, that it doesn't disallow us from then going back into that body that we inhabit and making the absolute best use of it. Did you guys follow that? That was where I was headed today. I had a verse to support it, but I didn't get a chance to really go over it. But that's it. What time we got left?
30 seconds.
All right, so if you're on Instagram, thank you so much for lending your ear. And we'll see you again soon. If you're on Zoom or Facebook, you guys can hang out. We'll do a little Q&A. Thank you, Hare Krishna. I'd like to get some feedback on what I said. Yeah.